Bum, 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 bum. So I am cranking everything up. It may take a minute, but we will be getting there. So tonight, I got a book, a virtual book. I'm going to find a world. If you would like to join me in the instance, I don't mind, as long as you have VRChat. Otherwise, you can stay in the chat and listen to me read, and that'll be good. Story time, indeed. So I've got to do a couple of things first. I'm not going to be at my home world, but I do need to make sure that everything's good to go. I need to find an instance that is somewhat comfortable. So it may take a minute to get there. I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. It is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday, so that's something to look forward to. Also, it was my son's birthday today, so I got to talk to him for a bit, and he is very happy with the gifts that he got, so that was nice. Yes. He's a happy boy. So when I got in that call with him, he was just like, "Yeah, happy birthday," because again, he tends to repeat what you say to him just because of how he is, and it's fine. But he was just like, "Okay, all right," and I could tell because I could hear on the other end that he was playing Mario, and it was just like, "I hear you, kid. I hear you, kid. You're playing your games. I get it. I get it. I get that 100%." I do try to be. I do try to be. So, but it was nice. I got to talk to him a bit. So I may have to restart the instance because that friends list glitch. So hang on. This is why we're going to be on the starting screen for a bit. We'll get everybody prepped and ready. I'm also going to use the restroom and grab something to drink. So if you're cuddled up in bed, by all means, stay that way. I also have to make a window that I can get like, it's going to be interesting because I have to make a window for the book, put it in front of me, make sure that I can flip the pages and everything. It's just like, all right, this is going to be interesting. I've never done this before. This is all an experiment. So, but it should be fine. Like even if I have to jump into desktop, I should be able to still read a book. So in VRChat, when you start it up, sometimes it doesn't load your friends list, like your social tab. It'll load everything else, just not your socials. So my quick fix is just restart the game. Yeah, it just doesn't show up. But yeah, I gotta find a world that is comfortable. Like not that I couldn't use my own world, but there we go. There's everybody. Yeah. And the close friend group is offline. I'm going to edit my status. I'm going to call it story time. Again, I know you're looking at a title screen. It's okay. Don't worry. We're working on it. The point is, once I find what I'm looking for, you'll know. But by all means, tell me about your day. Tell me where you're typing from. Tell me how you're doing. Squid did in fact order it. Yes, Squid is on his way. I'm going to look for a fireside. Fireside. Okay. Nope, nothing there. Okay, fireplace. There we go. Don't want a campsite. Comfy house or nocturne. Ooh, nocturne is a good one. That's a strong title. Victorian style. Okay, hang on. We may have something. I'm going to make it a Friends Plus. Oh, God, Jeff. Okay. All right, I've got to do that first. Shit. All right. Jeff, you would. You would. I appreciate it, but damn it. I'm going to read Edgar Allan Poe, but I have to start this off by singing Barbie Girl. Okay. All right. I see. I get it. Oh. Okay, hang on. I have to show you this instance. This is nice. Although I have to adjust the world sounds too, so we'll see. So I'm going to go to active. Hopefully it yep, there we go. All right. All right, there we go. So I also need to make a camera. Stream camera. Please tell me this world has some sound adjustments. I hope. Like we've got the spooky theme and I like it. I do. Can I sit? Oh, I can sit in the chair. Yeah, can I? Oh my God. See, everything about this is perfect. Everything about this place is perfect. Except for the world sounds, which are going to drive me nuts. Lights on or off? Okay. All right, there's that. Hang on. We may have something yet. Is another light on or off? I think this is music. It's just a blank record? Okay, that's the phone. We have a skull, because of course we do. Ooh, a lantern. That's nice. I like the lantern. Okay. All right. Please tell me there's a way to turn off the wind. Oh, the numbers in my name? Yeah, it's my birthday. That's what it means. I guess I'll just lower the world volume. There we go. Put it at 45. That should be fine. This seat's a little awkward. I mean, it's fine, but it's a little awkward. I wish there was like an armchair. That would be kind of cool. Candles on, of course. Reaper TTV. I mean, you're probably not wrong, but the chances that Reaper TTV has already been taken are pretty high. Maybe the candle's too strong? Can I adjust the fire? No, fire's just going to be the fire. Okay. I think this will be fine. And again, it's going to look a little bit weird just because I'm going to have like a book that you can't see. You're just going to have to assume that it's right here, or I'll like be poetic or something. But yes. So if you would like to join the instance, you most certainly can. Just know that I'll be reading a story out loud, and that's fine. It's a Friends Plus, but yeah, just try not to flood the world or else I'll have to leave. Other than that, you can stay in the chat, stay in your bed, whatever you need to do. There we go. Need to make a new window. I need to sing Barbie Girl, so there's that too. Spawn new window. Thank you. Oh my gosh. All right, so I'm going to put that right there in front of me. Switch the window. Wait just a damn minute. Thank you for the follow, Martina. I appreciate it. Motion sickness is fine for me. Yeah, see, it just takes a couple of minutes. You're pumped for Barbie Girl. Of course you're pumped for Barbie Girl. Who's never pumped for Barbie Girl? Okay, I'm going to make this I'm going to try and make it bigger. There we go. Okay. Going to move that over here. Again, that way I can read and then still watch. I just need to make sure this works. Can I flip the page? I can. You know why? Because I'm a fucking scholar. Hello, Boo. It's good to see you. Fun times. Okay, the telltale heart. Yep, true. Okay. And again, I don't remember it by beat. I don't remember it by heart. So if I mispronounce something or I say something incorrectly, you'll have to forgive me. But in the meantime, Barbie Girl lyrics. Yeah, I'm going to skip the whole dialogue in the start here. Because it's like, hiya, Barbie. Hi, Ken. Want to go for a ride? Sure, Ken. Jump in. You know, that sort of shit. It's just like, yeah. Cat wanted to listen to? Fair enough. Fair enough. Appreciate you all being here. It does mean a lot. So in any case, let's get this out of the way or else Jeff's going to like throw a fit because, you know, this is his favorite song of all time. Well, one of his near and dears. You know, it's time for me to get fucked up. Yeah. I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life in plastic. It's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Imagination, life is your creation. Come on, Barbie, let's go party. I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world. Life in plastic, it's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Imagination, life is your creation. I'm a blonde bimbo girl in a fantasy world. Dress me up, make it tight. I'm your dolly. You're my doll, rock and roll, feel the glamour in pink. Kiss me here, touch me there, hanky-panky. You can touch, you can play. If you say I'm always yours, I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world. Life in plastic, it's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Imagination, life is your creation. There we go. Thank you, Jeff, a.k.a. Screwella. If I have a mod in chat, give him a shout out. He's a DJ. He's going to be doing some work Saturday morning at about 7 a.m. for, I don't even know. It's like Europe Standard Time or something. Forget something. It'll be like 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But yes, that was Barbie Girl, Barbie World. You're welcome. Thank you. They do play VRChat too. It's true. In fact, they've been addicted all this week, so I get it. I get it completely. Anyway, we are now by the fireside, and we're going to read some Edgar Allan Poe, which I got for free because I have Amazon Prime. You know, for Prime Gaming, you should use those subscriptions. Please do. All right, let me get this. All right. So, of course, if we're reading Edgar Allan Poe and his works, we have to start with The Telltale Heart. I'm sure you all know it. You kind of love it? Fair enough, Screwella. But thank you, Boo. Thank you, thank you. So, is everyone ready? Is everyone tucked in? I want to make sure everybody's set, they're comfortable, they have a nice mug of warm milk, whatever they're drinking. For Jeff, it'll probably be some bev he's got in his back pocket. I am reading Edgar Allan Poe. I'm doing story time by the fireside. Fosters! There you go. Just want to make sure everybody's good, everybody's comfortable, everybody's set. Got a Corona and a kitty. Fair enough. Logan's comfortable. Good. Wonderful. Fantastic. Oh no, Boo. Boo. All right. Everybody seems to be settled in. Perfect. All right. Let's begin. The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily and how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain. But once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold and I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture. Dreadful things. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Welcome back, Boo. Appreciate it. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation, I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then thrust my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. Do not take that out of context. It moved, I moved it slowly. Very slowly. Yes, had to change the page there. You know how that be. And by all means, if you want to clip, go ahead and clip. Send it to VR Funny. Maybe he enjoys it. I have no idea. So that I might not disturb the old man's sleep, it took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out. What did the old man cry out? Who's there? I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Yes. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew he'd been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw with perfect distinctness all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And now I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is all but over acuteness of the senses. Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so am I, yes. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as this excited me into uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once. Once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity. Yes, suavity. That's a new word. We're going to put that in our daily word of the day, suavity. As officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely, to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in the high key and with a violent gesticulations. There we go. But the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the sound arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains, I shrieked! Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart. The end. That was A Telltale Heart. And we have more stories, by the way. I'm a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe, if you didn't know. I do fancy his works. So how's everybody feeling after that lovely story? I'm just going to click, clack. Click, clack, heart attack. Barely understood a thing. What did you understand, Squid? Like, let's talk about it. Like, let's talk about it. We just finished the story. What do you think happened here, Squid? What did you think of the tale? I am curious. Let's have a discussion. Boy, everybody seems to be feeling the same thing. All right. So is there anything you're lost about? Is there anything you're confused about? Again, these are intended to be short stories and poetry, so, you know. Being bad. So, okay. Basically what had happened, and I'll describe the story in layman's terms. There was an old man and either a person living with him or like his servant or something like that. We don't know specifically who this person is. And the old man had a false eye and it was creepy looking and the guy didn't like it. It basically drove him insane. And he's like, you know what? I'm tired of looking at the eye. The easiest thing to do is just get rid of the old man. And even though he liked the old man, he couldn't stand his eye. So that's part one. So then he's got this prep for like a full week. Like that was basically what he was talking about. Like he's just like, I'm going to keep checking. Is tonight going to be the night? Probably alone in the story. I mean, they were in the same house. They had to be. Because there was no way he could get into the room by just not being there. No, it's okay, Boo. But so one night the eye was open. It drove him insane, and so he killed him. And then after he killed him, he cut him up and put him under the floorboards. And so the part that got him was the guilt, obviously, of killing the old man because of his one creepy eye. Yeah, basically. So he did kill the old man. Officers came over because one of the neighbors heard either the shriek or him yelling or something. And because of the officers sticking around and because of his guilt, it basically drove him insane, and he basically showed them where the body was. Otherwise, he would have been fine if he said nothing. But in his mind, he was believing that he was hearing the old man's heart. Yes. And basically, this was him retelling the tale. Like, I guess if he was at the prison or wherever they put him, the insane asylum. Yes. But I love these stuffs. I love these stories. They're great. I would fall asleep to these stories, like no joke. Look at that fisheye. True. So shall we continue on? I could go back to the table of contents, I guess. But I could just go in order. I know there are some popular ones, like there's the Pit and the Pendulum. Black Cat's okay. I don't know if the Raven or the Crow's in here, but that would be good. But is everybody good? Everybody comfortable? Anybody need a bathroom break or a drink break? It's okay, Squid. I get it. I've actually been to Edgar Allan Poe's house too. Like I've been there. I visited there. I've got a cancellation stamp and everything. And at the house, they have like a little gimmick floorboard for kids. And I was a child at the time, so basically they were like, "Hey, you want to see what's under the floorboard?" And the answer I gave was no, because there's a heart under there. What's up, Boo? To relive my formative years, though, that was a time. God, that had to be like 24 years ago. It had to be. Want to see the heart? I mean, now it wouldn't bother me. Let me give you some context. I work at a medical school, and they bring in cadavers, and my office is literally right across the floor from the cadavers. So I've seen some shit. But we're ready for another chilling tale. Everybody good and comfortable? You've taken your restroom break? What's wrong, Boo? Yeah, just tell me. Like, if you need me to pause, it's fine. We can just chit-chat. I don't mind a good chatting session. That's why I'm here. No continue? Okay, I will continue. We are now moving on to The Black Cat. For the most wild, yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet, mad am I not? And very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die. And today I would unburthen my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy, I was noted for the dulcity and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my own companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great many variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of my character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to heart of him. Who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man? I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black, and sagacious to an astounding or astonishing degree. Either would work. And speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mentioned the latter of it all, or the matter at all, for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change of my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I had made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me. For what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, much intoxicated, from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him. When, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed, at once, to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut off one of its eyes from its socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pin the damnable atrocity. When reason returned in the morning, when I had slept off the fumes for the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble, equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of its lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful experience. But he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. One of the indivisible primary faculties, or sentiments, which gives direction to a character of man, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action, for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Perhaps we have not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such. The spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally consummate the injury I inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason for offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin. A deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it. If such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God, on the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. Hello, Infinite. You can have a seat if you'd like. I'm just doing stories. Say hello to Infinite, everybody. Hello. Just doing some Edgar Allan Poe reading. Yeah, no worries. Okay. So
I just want to stop by and say hi.
yeah, no
Hope you're
worries.
doing well.
I'm doing just fine. Just reading to my stream for bedtime stories. You know how it is. So
Uh,
I know you
Take
can't.
care, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you for stopping by. Glad you could be here. And I don't know if you're doing your own thing, but hello. Hello, hello. Whatever he's saying, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. Don't do it. So by the way, this is Infinite Soul. So if you wanted to know, he does do the stream. Yes. And now he's doing like hand signs and pointing at me, and I'm very confused.
All right, you take care now.
Yeah, no
I'm gonna end
worries.
stream.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so I'll begin again from the last start of the paragraph. But anyway, on the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains on my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in the compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall was a dense crowd where collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as any less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done in the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames, and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether in my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequent, for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. One night as I sat, half stupefied, in the den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin, or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. Evinced, as in to come along. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as it proceeded. When it reached the house, and it domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed a high degree, that humanity of feeling, which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long, I'm going to assume claws, and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, it was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. Hello, Vivian. Good to see you. Take care, Squid. Thank you for being here. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. For I am almost ashamed to my own. Yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name. For this above all I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony of death. And now I was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me a man, fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unmutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden frequent and ungovernable outburst of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand to the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife, goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. Take care, Logan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with the entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. Another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well of the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages were recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed, and had lately been plastered throughout the rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace, that had been filed up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and the wall hole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation, I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood, having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution. I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and had said to myself, "Here at last! Then my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it, at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, blissful sense of relief which the abundance of detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deeds disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of police came, very unexpectedly, into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them to their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in any muscle. My heart beat calmly, as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say, if not but one word, by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this very well constructed house, or this is a very well constructed house. In a rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane which I held in my hand upon the very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream. Utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror, half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in damnation. Of my own thoughts, it is a folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless. Through the extremity of terror and of awe, in the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with rent-extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast, whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. That was the Black Cat. Any questions so far? Did everybody fall asleep? Am I doing my job too well? I think everybody's like comfy and settled in. Should I continue? Did I knock everybody out? Was that something I did? Everybody was just listening to my voice and you're just like, yeah, that's nice. Ooh. I just talked about a man who murdered a cat and his wife. I guess I'll just continue on. The murderers in the Rue Morgue. You know it's good when it has a morgue. What song the sirens sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. Sir Thomas Browne. The mental features discoursed of as the analytical are in themselves but little susceptible of analysis. We appreciate them only in their effects. We know them, among other things, that they are always to their possessor when inordinately, possessed, a source of liveliness and enjoyment, of the liveliest enjoyment. There we go. As the strong man exults in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as call his muscles to action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which disentangles. He derives pleasure even the most trivial occupations bringing his talent into play. He is fond of enigmas, of conundrums, of hieroglyphics, exhibiting in his solutions of each a degree of acumen which appears to the ordinary apprehension preternatural. There we go. Preternatural. There we go. I'm getting some interesting words that I haven't heard of in a long time. So this is like an English spelling quiz all over again. It's fine. His results brought about by very soul and essence of method have, in truth, the whole air of intuition. The faculty of resolution is possibly much invigorated by the mathematical study, and especially by that highest branch of which it unjustly, and merely on account of its retrograde operations, has been called, as if par excellence, analysis. Yet, to calculate is not in itself to analyze. A chess player, for example, does the one without the effort at the other. It follows that the game of chess, in its effects upon mental character, is greatly misunderstood. I am not now writing a treatise. I am simply prefacing a somewhat peculiar narrative by observations very much at random. I will therefore take occasion to assert that the higher powers of the reflective intellect are more decidedly and more usefully tasked by the unostentatious game of draughts than by the elaborate frivolity of chess. In this latter, where the pieces have different and bizarre motions, with various and variable values, what is only complex is mistaken, and not unusual error, for what is profound. The attention is here called powerfully into play. If it flag for an instant, an oversight is committed resulting in injury or defeat. The possible moves, not being only manifold, but involute. The chances of such oversights are multiplied. And in 9 cases out of 10, it is more concentrative rather than the more acute player who conquers. In draughts, on the contrary, where the moves are unique and have but little variation, the probabilities of inadvertence are diminished, and the mere attention being left comparatively unemployed. What advantages are obtained by either party are obtained by superior acumen. To be less abstract, let us suppose a game of draughts where the pieces are reduced to 4 kings, and where, of course, no oversight is to be expected. It is obvious that here the victory can be decided, the most players being at all equal, only by some research movements. The result of some strong exertion of the intellect. Deprived of ordinary resources, the analyst throws. himself into the spirit of his opponent, identifies himself therewith, and not unfrequently sees thus. At a glance, the sole methods, sometime indeed absurdly simple ones, by which he may seduce into error and hurry or miscalculation. Whilst has long been noted for its influence upon the termed and the calculating power, the men of the highest order of intellect have known to take an apparently unaccountable delight in it, where eschewing chess is frivolous. Beyond doubt, there is nothing of a similar nature, so greatly tasking the faculty of analysis. The best chess player in Christendom may be little more than the best player of chess, but proficiency in whist implies capacity for success in all those more important undertakings where mind struggles with mind. When I say proficiency, I mean that perfection in the game, which includes a comprehension of all the sources whence legitimate advantage may be derived. These are not only manifold, but multiform, and lie frequently among recesses of thought altogether inaccessible to the ordinary understanding. To observe attentively is to remember distinctly, and so far the concentrative chess player will do very well at whist, while the rules of Hoyle, themselves based upon a mere mechanism of the game, are sufficiently and generally comprehensible. Thus, to have retentive memory and to proceed by the book are points commonly regarded as the sum total of good playing. But it is in matters beyond the limits of mere rule that the skill of the analyst is evinced. He makes in silence a host of observations and interferences. So perhaps do his companions, and the difference to the extent of the information obtained lies not so much in the validity of the interference as in the quality of the observation. The necessary knowledge is that of what to observe. Our player confines himself not at all, nor because the game is the object. Does he reject deductions from things external to the game? He examines the countenance of his partner, comparing it carefully with that of each of his opponents. He considers the mode of assorting the cards in each hand, often counting trump by trump and honor by honor, through the glances bestowed by their holders upon each. He knows every variation of face as the play progresses, gathering a fund of thought from the differences in the expression of certainty, of surprise, of triumph, or of chagrin. From the manner of gathering up a trick, he judges whether the person taking it can make another in the suit. He recognizes what is played through feint by the air with which it is thrown upon the table, a casual or inadvertent word, the accidental dropping or turning of a card, with the accompanying anxiety or carelessness in regard to its concealment, the counting of the tricks, with the order of their arrangement, embarrassment, hesitation, eagerness, or trepidation, all afford, to his apparently intuitive perception, indications of a true state of affairs. The first 2 or 3 rounds having been played, he is in full possession of the contents of each hand, and thenceforward puts down his cards with as absolute precision of purpose as the rest of the party had turned outward the faces of their own. The analytical power should not be confounded with the ample ingenuity. For while analyst is necessarily ingenious, the ingenious man is often remarkably incapable of analysis. The constructive or combining powers by which ingenuity usually manifested, and to which the phrenologists, I believe erroneously, have assigned a separate organ, supposing it a primitive faculty. It has been so frequently seen in those whose intellect bordered otherwise upon idiocy, as to have attracted general observation amongst writers on morals. Between ingenuity and the analytic ability, there exists a difference far greater, indeed, than that between the fancy and the imagination, but of a character very strictly analogous. It will be found, in fact, that the ingenious are always fanciful, and truly imaginative power never otherwise the analytic. Yeah, no worries. It's okay, boo. I'm talking about philosophy, apparently, in this story. There's a lot of discussion of chess and how to play poker. The narrative which follows will appear to the reader somewhat in light of the commentary upon the propositions just advanced. So there we go. Basically, he was talking about the mind and how it works as an analytical person and as a progressively altered person. So yes. Residing in Paris during the spring and part of the summer of 18-aught. It doesn't have a final year because that's how it be. It's basically 18XX. There became acquainted with the Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin. This young gentleman was of an excellent, indeed of an illustrious family, but by a variety of untoward events, it had been reduced to such poverty that the energy of his character succumbed beneath it, and he ceased to bestir himself in the world, nor to care for the retrieval of his fortunes. By courtesy of his creditors, there still remained in his possession a small remnant of his patrimony, and upon the income arising from this, he managed, by means of a rigorous economy, to procure the necessaries of life, without troubling himself about the superfluities. Books, indeed, were his sole luxuries, and in Paris these were easily obtained. You did? I appreciate it. I'll take it out. Thank you, boo. Thank you. I appreciate that. It does mean a lot. Like, honestly, if you feel the urge, draw me as you wish. I do appreciate that. Our first meeting was an obscure library in the Rue Montmartre, where the accident of both being in search of the same very rare and very remarkable volume brought us to closer communion. We saw each other again and again, and I was deeply interested in the little family history which he detailed to me with all that candor which a Frenchman indulges whenever mere self is his theme. I was astonished, too, at the vast extent of his reading, and above all, I felt my soul enkindled within me by the wild fervor and the vivid freshness of his imagination, seeking in Paris the objects I then sought. I felt that the society of such a man would be to me a treasure beyond price, and this feeling I frankly confided to him. It was at length arranged that we should live together during my stay in the city, and as my worldly circumstances were somewhat less embarrassed than his own, I was permitted to be at the expense of renting and furnishing in a style which suited the rather fantastic gloom of our common temper, a time-eaten and grotesque mansion, long deserted through superstitions into which we did not inquire, the tottering into its fall in a retired and desolate portion of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. Had the routine of our life at this place been known to the world, we should have been regarded as madmen, although perhaps as madmen of a harmless nature. Our seclusion was perfect. We admitted no visitors. Indeed, the locality of our retirement had been carefully kept a secret from my own former associates, and it had been many years since Dupin had ceased to know of or be known in Paris. We existed within ourselves, alone. It was a freak of fancy in my friend. Perfect, Jeff. For what else shall I call it? To be enamored of the night, or for her own sake, and into its bizarre, as into all his others I quietly fell, giving myself up to his wild whims and a perfect abandon. The sable, I think, is it sable or sobe? Divinity would not herself dwell with us always, but we could counterfeit her presence. At first dawn of the morning, we closed all the messy shutters of our old building, lighting a couple of the tapers which, strongly perfumed, threw out only the ghastliest and feeblest of rays. By the aid of these, when we busied our souls in dreams, reading, writing, or conversing, until warned by the clock of advent of the true darkness. Then we sallied forth into the streets arm in arm, continuing the topics of the day, or roaming far and wide until a late hour, seeking amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city that infinity of mental excitement which quiet observation can afford. At such times, I could not help remarking and admiring, although from his rich ideality I had been prepared to expect it, a peculiar analytic ability in Dupin. He seemed, too, take an eager delight in its exercise, if not exactly in its display, and did not hesitate to confess the pleasure thus derived. He boasted to me, with a low chuckling laugh, that most men, in respect to himself, wore windows in their bosoms, and was wont to follow up such assertions by direct and very startling proofs of his intimate knowledge of my own. His manner at these moments was frigid and abstract. His eyes were vacant in expression, while his voice, usually in rich tenor, rose into a treble which would have sounded petulantly but for the deliberateness and entire distinctness of the enunciation. Observing him in these moods, I often dwelt meditatively upon the old philosophy of Bonpensot, and amused myself with the fancy of a double Dupin, the creative and resolvent. Let it not be supposed from what I have just said, I am detailing any mystery or penning any romance. What I have described in The Frenchman was merely the result of an excited or perhaps of a diseased intelligence. But of the character of his remarks at the periods in question, an example will best convey the idea. We were strolling one night down a long, dirty street in the vicinity of the Palais Royal. Being both apparently occupied with thought, neither of us had spoken a syllable for 15 minutes at least. All at once, Dupin broke forth with these words. He is a very little fellow, that's true, and would do better for the Theatre de Variété. There can be no doubt of that, I replied unwittingly. And not at first. Observing so much that I had absorbed in reflection, the extraordinary manner in which the speaker had chimed in with any meditations. In an instant afterward, I recollected myself, and my astonishment was profound. Dupin, I said gravely, this is beyond my comprehension. I do not hesitate to say that I am amazed, and can scarcely credit my senses. How is it possible you should know I was thinking of? Here I paused to ascertain beyond a doubt whether he could truly know of whom I thought. Of Chantilly, he said. Why do you pause? You were remarking to yourself that his diminutive figure unfitted him for tragedy. This is precisely what had formed the subject of my reflections. Chantilly was the quondam cobbler of Rue Saint-Denis, who, becoming stage mad, had attempted the role of Xerxes, and Crebillon's tragedy so called, and had been notoriously pasquinaded for his pains. These are some interesting terms. I'm trying to do my best. If it's absolutely wrong, you'll have to forgive me. Tell me, for heaven's sake, I exclaimed, the method, if method is there, by which you have been enabled to fathom my soul in this manner. In fact, I was even more startled than I would have been willing to express. It was the fruiterer, replied my friend, who brought you to the conclusion that the mender of souls was not sufficient height for Xerxes. Et hygienis omnem. Omne. There we go. The fruiterer, you astonish me. I know no fruiterer whomsoever. The man who ran against you as we were entered the street. It may have been 15 minutes ago. I now remembered that, in fact, a fruiterer carrying upon his head a large basket of apples had nearly thrown me down by accident as we passed from the Rue C into the thoroughfare where we stood. But what had this to do with... Oh. Chantilly, I could not possibly understand. Okay, what had this not to do with Chantilly? Got it. There was not a particle of charlatanerie about Dupont. I will explain, he said, and that you may comprehend all clearly. We will first retrace the course of our meditations from the moment in which I spoke to you until that rencontre with the fruiterer in question. The larger links of the chain run thus: Chantilly, Orion, Dr. Nichols, Epicurus, stereotomy, sterotomy, I'm just going to go with that. The street stones, the fruiterer. There are few persons who have not, at some period in their lives, amused themselves in retracing the steps by which particular conclusions of their own minds have been attained. The occupation is often full of interest, and he who attempts it for the first time is astonished by the apparent illimitable distance and incoherence between starting point and the goal. What, then, must have been my amazement when I heard the Frenchman speak what he had just spoken, and when I could not help acknowledging that he had spoken the truth. He continued, "We have been talking of horses. If I remember right, just before leaving the Rue C, this was the last subject we discussed. As we crossed into the street, a fruiterer with a large basket upon his head, brushing quickly past us, thrust you upon a pile of paving stones collected at a spot where the causeway is undergoing repair. You stepped upon one of those loose fragments, slipped slightly, strained your ankle, appeared vexed or sulky, muttered a few words, turned to look at the pile, and then proceeded in silence. I was not particularly attentive to what you did, but observation has become with me, of late, a species of necessity. You kept your eyes upon the ground, glancing with a petulant expression at the holes and the ruts in the pavement, so that I saw you were still thinking of the stones, until we reached the little alley called Le Martin, which had been paved by way of experiment with the overlapping and riveted blocks. Here your countenance brightened up and perceived your lips move. I could not doubt as you were murmured the word stereotomy. Stereotomy, let's go with that. A term very effectively applied to this species of pavement. I knew that you could not say to yourself stereotomy without being brought to think of anatomies, or atomies, there we go, atomies, and thus of the theories of Epicurus. And since, when we discussed this subject not very long ago, I mentioned to you how singularly, yet with how little notice, the vague guesses of that noble Greek had met with the confirmation in the late nebular cosmogony, I felt that you could not avoid casting your eyes upward to look at the great nebula of Orion, and I certainly expected that you would do so. You did look up, and I was now assured that I had correctly followed your steps. But in that bitter tirade upon Chantilly, which appeared in yesterday's Musée, the satirist, making some disgraceful allusions to the cobbler, changed of name upon assuming the buskin, quoted a Latin line about which we have often conversed. I mean the line, perditit antiquum litera sonum. I had told you that this was a reference to Orion, formerly written Urian. It's a different spelling. It's Orion. It's still Orion, but with a U. And from certain pungencies connected with the explanations. I was aware that you could not have forgotten it. It was clear, therefore, that you would not fail to combine the two ideas of Orion and Chantilly. That you did combine them I saw by the character of the smile which passed over your lips. You thought of the poor cobbler's immolation. So far you had been stooping in your gait, but now I saw you draw yourself up to your full height. I was then sure that you had reflected upon the diminutive figure of Chantilly. At this point I interrupted your meditations to remark that, as in fact, he was a very little fellow, that Chantilly. He would do better at the Theatre des Variétés. Not long after this, we were looking over an evening edition of the Gazette des Tribunaux, with the following paragraphs arrested our attention. Extraordinary murders. This morning, about 3 o'clock, the inhabitants of the Quartier des Saint-Roch were roused from sleep by a succession of terrific shrieks, ensuing apparently from the fourth story of a house in the Rue Morgue, known to be the sole occupancy of one Madame d'Espagnan and her daughter, Mademoiselle Camille l'Espagnan, after some delay occasioned by a fruitless attempt to procure admission to the usual manner. The gateway was broken in with a crowbar, and 8 or 10 of the neighbors entered accompanied by 2 gendarmes. By this time the cries had ceased, but as the party rushed up the flight of stairs, 2 or more rough voices in angry contention were distinguished and seemed to proceed from the upper part of the house. As the second landing was reached, these sounds also had ceased and everything remained perfectly quiet. The party spread themselves and hurried from room to room. Upon arriving at a large back chamber in the fourth story, the door of which being found locked with the key inside was forced open. A spectacle presented itself which struck everyone present not less with horror than with astonishment. The apartment was in the wildest disorder, the furniture broken and thrown about in all directions. There was only one bedstead, and from this the bed had been removed and thrown in the middle of the floor. On a chair lay a razor besmeared with blood. On the hearth were 2 or 3 long, thick tresses of gray human hair, also dabbled in blood, and seeming to have been pulled out by the roots. It's okay, Boo. Not a lot of us know how to draw a mouse. It's okay. Upon the floor were found 4 Napoleons, an earring of topaz, 3 large silver spoons, 3 smaller métal d'argent, 2 bags containing nearly 4,000 francs in gold. The drawers of a bureau which stood in the corner were open, and had been apparently rifled, although many articles still remained in them. A small iron safe was discovered under the bed. Not under the bedstead. It was open, with the key still in the door. It had no contents beyond a few old letters and other papers of little consequence. Of Madame l'Espagnan no traces were here seen, but an unusual quantity of soot being observed in the fireplace. A search was made in the chimney, and horrible to relate, the corpse of the daughter, head downward, was dragged therefrom, it having been thus forced up a narrow aperture for a considerable distance. The body was quite warm. Upon examining it, many excoriations were perceived, no doubt occasioned by the violence with which it had been thrust up and disengaged. Upon the face were many severe scratches, and upon the throat dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails, as if the deceased had been throttled to death. After a thorough investigation of every portion of the house, without farther discovery, the party made its way to a small paved yard in the rear of the building, where lay the corpse of the old lady, with her throat so entirely cut that upon attempt to raise her, the head fell off. The body, as well as the head, was fearfully mutilated. The former so much so as scarcely to retain any semblance of humanity. To this horrible mystery there is not as yet, we believe, the slightest clue. The next day's paper had these additional particulars. The tragedy in the Rue Morgue. Many individuals have been examined in relation to the most extraordinary and frightful affair. The word affair is not yet in France, that levity of import which conveys with us. But nothing whatever has transpired to throw light upon it. We give below all material testimony elicited. Pauline Dubourg, laundress, deposes that she's known both the deceased for 3 years, having washed for them during that period. The old lady and her daughter seemed on good terms, very affectionate towards each other. They were excellent pay. Could not speak in regard to their mode or means of living. Believed that Madame L had fortunes for a living, or told fortunes for a living. Was reputed to have money put by. Never met any persons in the house when she called for the clothes, nor took them home. Was sure that they had no servant in employ. There appeared to be no furniture in any part of the building except for the fourth story. Pierre Moreau, tobacconist, deposes that he's been in the habit of selling small quantities of tobacco and snuff to Madame de l'Espinaye, for nearly 4 years. Was born in the neighborhood and has always resided there. The deceased and her daughter had occupied the house in which the corpses were found for more than 6 years. It was formerly occupied by a jeweler who underlet the upper rooms to various persons. The house was the property of Madame L. She became dissatisfied with the abuse of the premises by her tenant and moved into them herself, refusing to let any portion. The old lady was childish. Witness had seen the daughter some 5 or 6 times during the 6 years. The two lived an exceedingly retired life, were reputed to have money, had heard it said among the neighbors that Madame L told fortunes, did not believe it, had never seen any person enter the door except the old lady and her daughter, a porter once or twice, and a physician some 8 or 10. Many other persons, neighbors, gave evidence to the same effect. No one was spoken of frequenting the house. It was not known whether there was any living connections of Madame L and her daughter. The shutters of the front window were seldom open. Those in the rear were always closed, and the exception of the large back room, 4th story, the house was a good house, not very old. Isidore Jedam proposes that he was called to the house about 3 o'clock in the morning and found some 20 or 30 persons at the gateway endeavoring to gain admittance. Forced it open at length with a bayonet, not with the crowbar, had but little difficulty getting it open on account of it being a double or folding gate, and bolted neither at top not bottom. Not bottom, not top. The shrieks were continued until the gate was forced, and then suddenly ceased. They seemed to be screams of some person or persons in great agony, were loud and drawn out, not short and quick. Witness laid the way upstairs. Upon reaching the first landing, heard 2 voices in loud, angry contention. One of a gruff voice, the other much shriller, a strange voice. Could distinguish some words of the former, which was that of a Frenchman. Was positive that it was not a woman's voice. Could distinguish the words sacré and diable. The shrill voice was that of a foreigner. Could not be sure whether it was the voice of a man or of a woman. Could not make out what was said, but believed the language to be Spanish. The state of the room and the bodies was described by this witness as we described them yesterday. Henry Duvois, a neighbor, had by trade a silversmith. Oh my goodness, thank you for following Blitzkrieg. Appreciate it. Deposes that he was of the party who first entered the house. Corroborates the testimony of Musette and General. As soon as they forced an entrance, they reclosed the doors to keep out the crowd, which collected very fast, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour. The shrill voice, his witness thinks, was that of an Italian. Was certain it was not French. Could not be sure that it was a man's voice. It might have been a woman's. Was not acquainted with the Italian language. Could not distinguish the words, but was convinced by the intonation that the speaker was Italian. Knew Madame L. and her daughter, had conversed with both frequently, was sure the shrill voice was not that of either of the deceased. Odenheimer Restaurante. This witness volunteered his testimony. Not speaking French, was examined through the interpreter. Is a native of Amsterdam. Was passing the house at time of the shrieks. They lasted for several minutes, probably 10. They were long and loud, very awful and distressing. Was one of those who entered the building, corroborated the previous evidence in every respect but one. Was sure that the shrill voice was that of a man, of a Frenchman. Could not distinguish the words uttered. They were loud and quick, unequal, spoken apparently in fear as well as in anger. The voice was harsh, not so much shrill as harsh. Could not call it a shrill voice. The gruff voice said repeatedly, Sacré diable, and once, Mon Dieu. Jules Magnaud, banker, of the firm of Mignaud et Fré, Rue de Lorraine, is the elder Magnaud. Madame L'Espanaye had some property, had opened an account with his banking house in the spring of the year, 8 years previously, made frequent deposits in small sums. We'll get there, Blitzkrieg. I'll explain. Made frequent deposits in small sums, had checked for nothing until the third day before her death, when she took out in person the sum of 4,000 francs. This sum was paid in gold, and a clerk went home with the money. Adolphe Lebon, clerk at Mignon et Fraisse, deposes that on the day in question, about noon, he accompanied Madame L'Espanaye to her residence with 4,000 francs, put up in 2 bags. Upon the door being opened, Mademoiselle L. appeared and took from his hands one of the bags, while the old lady relieved him of the other. He then bowed and departed, did not see any person in the street at the time, and is a by-street, very lonely. William Bird, tailor, deposes that he was one of the party who entered the house. Is an Englishman. Has lived in Paris 2 years. Was one of the first to ascend the stairs. Heard the voices in contention. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman. Could make out several words, but cannot now remember all. Heard distinctly Sacré and Mon Dieu. There was a sound at the moment as if of several persons struggling, a scraping, scuffling sound. The shrill voice was very loud, louder than the gruff one. Is sure it was not the voice of an Englishman. Appears to be that of a German. Might have been a woman's voice. Does not understand German. 4 of the above named witnesses being recalled, deposed, and that the door of the chamber in which was found the body, Mademoiselle L., was locked on the inside when the party reached it. Everything was perfectly silent. No groans or noises of any kind. Upon forcing the door, no person was seen. The windows, both of the back and front room. Yeah, no worries, Blitzkrieg. It's all good. Were down and firmly fastened from within. A door between the 2 rooms was closed, but not locked. The door leading from the front room into the passage was locked. With the key on the inside, a small room in the front of the house, on the 4th story, at the head of the passage, was open, the door being ajar. This room was crowded with old beds, boxes, and so forth. These were carefully removed and searched. There was not an inch of any portion of the house which was not carefully searched. Sweeps were sent up and down the chimneys. The house was a 4-story one, with garrets. A trap door on the roof was nailed down very securely, did not appear to have been opened for years. The time elapsing between the hearing of the voices in contention and the breaking open of the room door was variously stated by the witnesses. Some made it as short as 3 minutes, some as long as 5. The door was opened with difficulty. Alfonso Garcio, undertaker, deposes that he resides in the Rue Morgue. As a native of Spain, was one of the party who entered the house, did not proceed up the stairs, is nervous, and was apprehensive of the consequences of agitation. Heard the voices in contention. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, could not distinguish what was said. The shrill voice was that of an Englishman, is sure of this, does not understand the English language, but judges by the intonation. Alberto Montani, confectioner, deposes that he was among the first to ascend the stairs, heard the voices in question. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, distinguished several words. The speaker appeared to be expostulating, could not make out the words of the shrill voice, spoke quick and unevenly, thinks it is the voice of a Russian, corroborates the general testimony, is an Italian, never conversed with a native of Russia. Several witnesses recalled here testified that the chimneys of all the rooms in the 4th story were too narrow to admit the passage of a human being. By sweeps were meant cylindrical sweeping brushes, such as are employed by those who clean chimneys. Those brushes were passed up and down every flue in the house. There was no back passage by which they could have descended while the party proceeded up the stairs. The body of Mademoiselle de l'Espinay was so firmly wedged in the chimney that it could not be got down until 4 or 5 of the party united their strength. Paul Dumas, physician, deposes that he was called to view the bodies about daybreak. They were both then lying on the sacking of the bedstead in the chamber where Mademoiselle L. was found. The corpse of the young lady was much bruised and excoriated. The fact that it had been thrust up the chimney would sufficiently account for these appearances. The throat was greatly chafed. There were several deep scratches just below the chin, together a series of livid spots which were evidently the impressions of fingers. The face was fearfully discolored, and the eyeballs protruded. The tongue had been partially bitten through. A large bruise was discovered upon the pit of the stomach, produced apparently by the pressure of a knee. In the opinion of M. Dumas, Mademoiselle L'Espinay had been throttled to death by some person or persons unknown. The corpse of the mother was horribly mutilated. All the bones of the right leg and arm were more or less shattered. The left tibia much splintered, as well as all ribs of the left side. Whole body dreadfully bruised and discolored. It was not possible to say how the injuries had been inflicted. A heavy club of wood, or a broad bar of iron, a chair, any large, heavy, and obtuse weapon would have produced such results. If wielded by the hands of a very powerful man, no woman could have inflicted the blows with any weapon. It's a little sexist, but I get it. The head of the deceased, when seen by witnesses, was entirely separated from the body and was greatly shattered. The throat had evidently been cut with some sharp instrument, probably with a razor. Alexandre Etienne, surgeon, was called with M. Dumas to view the bodies, corroborated the testimony and the opinion of M. Dumas. Nothing farther of importance was elicited, although several other persons were examined. A murder so mysterious and so perplexing in all its particulars was never before committed in Paris. If indeed a murder has been committed at all, the police were entirely at fault, an unusual occurrence in affairs of this nature. There is not, however, the shadow of a clue apparent. The evening edition of the paper stated that the greatest excitement still continued in the Quartier de Saint-Roch. The Quartier Saint-Roch. There we go. That the premises in question had been carefully researched and fresh examinations of witnesses instituted, but all to no purpose. A postscript, however, mentioned that Adolphe Lebon had arrested and imprisoned, although nothing appeared to incriminate him, beyond the facts already detailed. Dupont seems regularly interested in the progress of this affair, at least so that as I judge from his manner, for he made no comments. It was only after the announcement that Le Bon had been imprisoned that he asked me my opinion respecting the murders. I could merely agree with all Paris in considering them an insoluble mystery. I saw no means by which it would be possible to trace the murderer. We must not judge the mean judge we must not judge of the mean, said Dupont. By this shell of an examination, the Parisian police, so much extolled for acumen, are cunning, but no more. There is no method in their proceedings beyond the method of the moment. They may make a vast parade of measures, but not unfrequently these are just so ill adapted to the objects proposed as to put us in the mind of Monsieur Jourdain's calling for this rôle de chambre pour min et l'ami. A lot of French words put together. I'm trying. Didn't get it. It's fine. We just pass over it. He's just making a comment about something he read about. The results attained by them are not unfrequently surprising, but for the most part are brought by the simple diligence and activity. Yay! Nice job. Proud of you. When these qualities are unavailing, their schemes fail. Vidocq, for example, was a good guesser and a persevering man, but without educated thought, he erred continuously by very intensity of his investigations. He impaired his vision by holding the object too close. He might see, perhaps, one or two points with unusual clearness, but in doing so, he necessarily lost sight of the matter as a whole. Thus, there is such a thing as being too profound. Truth is not always in a well. In fact, as regards the more important knowledge, I do believe that she is invariably superficial. You understand some French? Good. I don't. I understand very little French. The depths lie in the valleys where we seek her, and not upon the mountaintops where she is found. The modes and sources of this kind of error were well typified in the contemplation of the heavenly bodies. To look at a star by glances, to view it in the sidelong way, by turning toward the exterior portions of the retina, more perceptible of feeble impressions of light than the interior, is to behold the star distinctly, is to have the best appreciation of its luster, at luster which grows dims just in the proportion as we turn our vision fully upon it. A greater number of rays actually fall upon the eye in the latter case, but in the former, there is more refined capacity for comprehension. By undue profundity, yes, we perplex and enfeeble thought, and it is possible to make even Venus herself vanish from the firmament by a scrutiny too sustained, too concentrated, or too direct. As for these murderers, let's enter into some examinations for ourselves before we make up an opinion respecting them. An inquiry will afford us amusement. I thought this an odd term, so I applied, but said nothing. And let's beside, Le Bon once rendered me a service for which I am not ungrateful. We will go and see the premises with our own eyes. I know G, a prefect police, and shall have no difficulty obtaining the necessary permission. The permission was obtained, and we proceeded to the Rue Moore. Thank you, Blitzkrieg. I appreciate it. This is one of those miserable thoroughfares which intervene between the Rue Richelieu, Rue Richelieu. I'm going to go with that. I don't think that's correct, but we're going to go with it. And the Rue Saint-Roch. It was late in the afternoon when we reached it. This quarter is at a great distance from that in which we resided. It's not resolute. If it was resolute, I could read that. It's like Richelei or Lieu. I think it's just a name. I think it's just a street name. It was late afternoon when we reached it, as this quarter is at a great distance from in which we resided. The house was readily found, for there was still many persons gazing up at the closed shutters, with an objectless curiosity. From the opposite side of the way, it was an ordinary Parisian house, with a gateway, on one side of which was glazed watchbox, with sliding panel in the window, indicating the lot de concierge. Before going in, we walked up the street, turning down an alley, and then, again turning, passed in the rear of the building. Dupont, meanwhile, examining the whole neighborhood, as well as the house, with a minuteness of attention for which I could see no possible object. Retracing our steps, we came in again to the front of the dwelling, rang, and having shown our credentials, were admitted by the agents in charge. Of course, thank you. I appreciate it, Boo. We went up the stairs into the chamber where the body of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye had been found, and where both the deceased still lay. The disorders of the room had, as usual, been suffered to exist. I saw nothing beyond which had been stated in the Gazette des Tribunaux. Dupont scrutinized everything, not excepting the bodies of the victims. When we went into the other rooms and into the yard, the gendarme accompanying us throughout. The examination occupied us until dark. We took our departure. On our way home, my companion stepped in for a moment at the office for one of the daily papers. I have said that the whims of my friend were manifold, and that je l'ai imaginé. For his phrase, there is no English equivalent. Which makes sense, because if there was an English equivalent, they'd just say it. It was his humor, now low decline all conversation in the subject of the murder, until about noon the next day. He then asked me suddenly if I observed anything peculiar at the scene of the atrocity. There was something in his manner of emphasizing the word peculiar, which caused me to shudder without knowing why. No, nothing peculiar, I said. Nothing more, at least, than we both saw stated in the paper. The Gazette, he replied, has not entered, I fear, into the unusual horror of the thing. But dismiss the idle opinions of this print. It appears to me that this mystery is considered insoluble, for the very reason in which should cause it to be regarded as easy of solution. I mean, for the outstripped character of its features. Police are confounded by a seeming absence of motive, not for the murder itself, but for the atrocity of the murder. They are puzzled, too, by the seeming impossibility of reconciling the voices heard in contention, with the facts that no one was discovered upstairs but the assassinated mademoiselle, and that there were no means of egress without the notice of the party ascending. The wild disorder of the room, the corpse thrust, with the head downward, up the chimney, the frightful mutilation of the body of the old lady, these considerations, with those just mentioned and the others which I need not mention, have suffered to paralyze the powers by putting completely at fault the boasted acumen of the government agents. They have fallen into the gross but common error of confounding the unusual with the abstruse. But it is by these deviations from the plane of an ordinary that reason feels its way, if at all, in its search for the true. In investigations such as we are now pursuing, it should not be so much asked what has occurred as what has occurred that has never occurred before. In fact, the facility with which I shall arrive, or have arrived at the solution of this mystery, is in the direct ratio of its apparent insolubility in the eyes of the police. I stared at the speaker in mute astonishment. I am now awaiting, he continued, looking toward the door of our apartment, I am now awaiting the person who, although perhaps not the perpetrator of these butcheries, must have been in some measure implicated in their perpetration. Of the worst portion of the crimes committed, it is probable that he is innocent. I hope that I am right in this supposition, for upon it I build my expectation of the reading the entire riddle. I look for the man here, in this room, every moment. It is true that he may not arrive, but the probability is that he will. Should he come, it will be necessary to detain him. Here are pistols, and we both now know how to use them when the occasion demands their use. I took the pistols, scarcely knowing what I did or believing what I'd heard. While Dupin went on, very much of this a soliloquy, I already have spoken of his abstract manner in such times. His discourse was addressed to myself, but his voice, although by no means loud, had that intonation which was commonly employed in the speaking to someone at a great distance. His eyes, vacant in expression, regarded only the wall. That the voices heard in contention, he said, by the party upon the stairs were not the voices of the women themselves was fully proved by the evidence. This relieves us of all doubt upon the question whether the old lady could have first destroyed the daughter and then afterward committed suicide. I speak of this point chiefly for the sake of method, for the strength of Madame L'Espanaye would have been utterly unequal to the task of thrusting her daughter's corpse up the chimney as it was found, and the nature of the wounds upon her own person entirely. Preclude the idea of self-destruction. Murder, then, has been committed by some third party, and the voices of this third party were those heard in contention. Let me now advert, not the whole testimony respecting these voices, but to what peculiar in the testimony. Did you observe anything peculiar about it? I remarked that while all the witnesses agreed in supposing the gruff voice to be that of a Frenchman, there was much disagreement in regard to the shrill, or as one individual termed it, the harsh voice. That was the evidence itself, said Dupin. But it was not the peculiarity of the evidence. You have observed nothing distinctive. Yet there was something to be observed. The witnesses, as you remark, agreed about the gruff voice. They were here unanimous. But in regard to the shrill voice, the peculiarity is not that they disagreed, but that while an Italian, an Englishman, a Spaniard, a Hollander, and a Frenchman attempted to describe it, each one of it had that of a foreigner. Each is sure that it was not the voice of one of his own countrymen. Each likens it not to the voice of an individual of any nation with those languages he is conversant, but the converse. The Frenchman supposes it the voice of a Spaniard, and might have distinguished some words he had been acquainted with the Spanish. The Dutchman maintains it to have been that of a Frenchman, but we find it stated that not understanding French, this witness was examined through an interpreter. The Englishman thinks it's the voice of a German, and does not understand German. The Spaniard is sure that it was an Englishman, but judges the intonation altogether, as he has no knowledge of English. That Italian believes the voice of a Russian, but has never conversed with a native of Russia. A second Frenchman differs, moreover, with the first. The positive is that it was the voice of an Italian, but not being cognizant of that tongue, is, like the Spaniard, convinced by the intonation. Now, how strangely unusual must the voice have really been, about which such testimony as this could have been elicited? In those tones, even denizens of the 5 great divisions of Europe could recognize nothing familiar. You will say that it might have been a person of Asiatic or Asiatic or an African. Neither Asiatics or Africans abound in Paris, but without denying the interference, I will now merely call your attention to 3 points. The voice is termed by one witness harsh rather than shrill. It is represented by 2 others as being quick and unequal. No words, no sound resembling words were made by any witnesses mentioned distinguishable. I know not, continued Dupin, that impression I may have made so far upon your own understanding, but I do not hesitate to say that legitimate deductions, even from this portion of the testimony, the portion respecting the gruff and shrill voices, are in themselves sufficient to engender a suspicion, which should have give direction to all further progress in the investigation of the mystery. I said legitimate deductions, but my meaning is not thus fully expressed. I design to imply that the deductions of the sole proper ones, and that the suspicion arises inevitably from them is the single result. What the suspicion is, however, I will not say just yet. I merely wish you to bear in mind that with myself, it was sufficiently forcible to give a definite form, the certain tendency to my inquiries within the chamber. Now let us now transport ourselves in fancy to this chamber. What shall we first seek here? The means of egress employed by the murderers. It is not too much to say that neither of us believe the preternatural events, Madame and Mademoiselle L'Espanaye, were not destroyed by spirits. The doers of the deed were material and escaped materially. Then how? Fortunately, there is but one mode of reasoning upon the point, and the mode must lead to a definite decision. Let us examine each by each the possible means of egress. It is clear that the assassins were in the room where Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was found, or at least in the room adjoining when the party ascended the stairs. It is then only from these two apartments that we have to seek issues. The police have laid bare the floors, the ceilings, and the masonry of the walls in every direction. No secret issues could have been escaped in their vigilance. But not trusting to their eyes, I examined with my own. There were then no secret issues. Both doors leading from the rooms into the passage were securely locked, with the keys inside. Let us turn to the chimneys. Although they were ordinary width for some 8 or 10 feet above the hearths, they will not admit through their extent the body of a large cat. The impossibility of egress, by means already stated, thus absolute. We are reduced to the windows. Through those in the front of the room, no one could have escaped without notice from the crowd in the street. The murderers must have passed then through those of the back room. Now brought to this conclusion in so unequivocal a manner as we are, it is not our part as reasoners to reject it on account of apparent impossibilities. It is only left for us to prove that these apparent impossibilities are in reality not such. Thank you for your point contribution. There are 2 windows in the chamber. 2. One of which is unobstructed by furniture and is wholly visible. The lower portion of the other is hidden from view by hand of the unwieldy bedstead, which is thrust close against it. The former was found securely fastened from within. It resisted the utmost force to who endeavored to raise it. A large gimlet hole had been pierced in its frame to the left, and very stout nail was found fitted therein. Nearly to the head, upon examining the other window, a similar nail was similarly fitted in it, and a rigorous attempt to raise its sash failed also. The police were now entirely satisfied that egress had not been in these directions, and therefore it was thought a matter of supererogation to withdraw the nails and open the windows. My own examination was somewhat more particular, and it was so for the reason that I have just given, because here it was. I knew that all apparent impossibilities must be proved to be not such in reality. I proceeded to think thus. A posteriori, the murderers did escape from one of these windows. This being so, they could have refastened the sashes from inside as they were found fastened. The consideration put a stop, through its obviousness, to the scrutiny of the police in this quarter. Yet the sashes were fastened. They must then have the power of fastening themselves. There is no escape from this conclusion. I stepped on the unobstructed casement, withdrew the nail for some difficulty, and attempted to raise the sash. It resisted all my efforts, as I anticipated. A concealed spring must, I now know, exist. And this corroboration of my idea convinced me that my premises, at least, were correct. However, mysterious still appeared in the circumstances attending the nails. A careful search soon brought to light the hidden spring. I pressed it, and satisfied with my discovery, forbore to upraise the sash. I now replaced the nail and regarded it attentively. The person passing through the window might have reclosed it, and the spring would have been caught, but the nail could not have been replaced. The conclusion was plain, and again narrowed to the field of my investigations. The assassins must have escaped the other window, supposing then the springs upon each sash to be the same, as was probable. There must be found a difference between the nails, or at least between the modes of their fixture, getting upon the sacking of the bedstead. I looked over the headboard minutely at the second encasement. Passing my hand down behind the board, I readily discovered, pressed the spring, which was, as I had supposed, identical in character to its neighbor. I now looked at the nail, and was stout as the other, and apparently fitted the same manner, driven to nearly up the head. You will say that I was puzzled. No worries, boo. No worries. But if you think so, you must have misunderstood the nature of the inductions. To use a sporting phrase, I had not been once at fault. The scent had never for an instant been lost. There was no flaw in any link of the chain. I had traced the secret to its ultimate result, and that result was the nail. It had, I say, in every respect, the appearance of its fellow in the other window. But this fact was absolute nullity, conclusive as it might seem to be, when compared to the consideration that here, at this point, terminated the clue. There must be something wrong, I said, about the nail. I touched it, and the head, with about a quarter of an inch of the shank, came off in my fingers. The rest of the shank was in the gimlet hole, where it had been broken off. The fracture was an old one, for its edges were encrusted with rust, and had apparently been accomplished by the blow of a hammer, which had partially embedded in the top of the bed sash and a head portion of the nail. I now carefully replaced this head portion in the indentation whence I had taken it, and the resemblance with a perfect nail was complete. The fissure was invisible. Pressing the spring, I gently raised the sash for a few inches, and the head went up with it. The remaining firm in its bed, I closed the window, and the semblance of the whole nail was again perfect. The riddle so far am I a soul eater? I mean, who doesn't like a good soul every now and again? The riddle so far was now unriddled. The assassin had escaped through the window which looked upon the bed, dropping of its own accord upon his exit, or perhaps purposely closed, had become fastened by the spring, and it was the retention of the spring which had been mistaken by the police for that of the nail, further inquiry being thus considered unnecessary. It's okay. The next question is that of the mode of descent. Upon this point, I have been satisfied in my walk with you around the building. About 5.5 feet from the casement in question, there runs a lightning rod. From this rod, it would have been impossible for anyone to reach the window itself, to say nothing of entering it. I observed, however, that the shutters of the fourth story were of a particular kind called Parisian carpenters' ferrades, a kind rarely employed at present day, but frequently seen upon very old mansions in Lyons and Bordeaux. They are the form of an ordinary door, a single, not a folding door, except the lower half is latticed or worked with open trellis, thus affording an excellent hold for the hands. In the present instance, these shutters are fully 3.5 feet broad. When we saw them from the rear of the house, they were both about half open. That is to say, they stood off the right angles from the walls. It is probable that the police, as well as myself, examined the back of the tenement, but if so, in looking for these ferrades in line of their breadth, as they must have done, they did not perceive this great breadth itself, or at all events, failed to take into due consideration. In fact, having once satisfied themselves that no egress could have been made in this quarter, they would naturally bestow here a very cursory examination. It was clear to me, however, that the shutter belonging to the window at the head of the bed would, if swung fully back to the wall, reach to within 2 feet of the lightning rod. It was also evident that by exertion of the very unusual degree of activity and courage, an entrance into the window from the rod might have thus effected. By reaching to the distance of 2.5 feet, we now suppose the shutter opened to this extent, a robber might have taken a firm grasp to the trellis work, letting go then his hold upon the rod, placing his feet securely against the wall, and springing boldly from it. He might have swung the shutter so as to close it. And if we imagine the window open at the time, might even have swung himself into the room. I wish you to bear especially in mind that I have spoken of very unusual degree of activity as to requisite to success and so hazardous and so difficult a feat. It is but chiefly I wish to impress upon your understanding. It is my design to show you at first that the thing might possibly be accomplished. But secondly and chiefly, I wish to impress upon you the understanding, the very extraordinary, almost preternatural character of that agility which I have accomplished it, or which could have accomplished it. I will say, no doubt, using the language of the law, that to make out my case, I should rather undervalue than insist upon full estimation of the activity required in this matter. This may be the practice in law, but it is not the usage of my reason. My ultimate object is only the truth. My immediate purpose is to lead you to the place of my juxtaposition. That very unusual activity of which I have just spoken with you, the very peculiar shrill or harsh and unequal voice, about those nationality no two persons could be found to agree, and whose utterance no symbolification could be detected. At these words, a vague, half-formed conception of meaning of Dupont fitted over my mind. It seemed to be upon the verge of comprehension without power to comprehend. Men, at times, find themselves upon the brink of remembrance without being able, in the end, to remember. My friend went on in his discourse. You will see, he said, that I have shifted the question from a mode of egress to that of ingress. It is my design to convey the idea that both were effected in the same manner, at the same point. Let us now revert to the interior of the room. Let us survey the appearances here. The drawers of the bureau, it is said to have been rifled, although many articles of apparel still remained within them. The conclusion here is absurd. It is a mere guess, a very silly one, and no more. How are we to know that the articles found in the drawers were not all these drawers had originally contained? Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter lived an exceedingly retired life, saw no company, seldom went out, had little use for numerous changes of habiliment. Those found were at least as good quality as any likely to be possessed by these ladies. If a thief had taken any, why did he not take the best? Why did he not take it all? And in a word, why did he abandon 4,000 francs in gold to encumber himself with a bundle of linen? The gold was abandoned. Nearly the whole sum mentioned by Monsieur Mignon, the banker, was discovered in bags upon the floor. I wish you, therefore, to discard from your thoughts the blundering idea of motive engendered in the brains of the police by the portion of the evidence which speaks of money delivered at the door of the house. Coincidences 10 times as remarkable as these, the delivery of the money, the murder committed within 3 days upon the party receiving it, happen to all of us every hour of our lives, without attracting even momentary notice. Coincidences in general are great stumbling blocks in our way to that class of thinkers who have been educated to know nothing of the theory of probabilities, that theory to which the most glorious objects of human research are indebted for the most glorious of illustration. In the present instance, had the gold been gone, the fact of its delivery 3 days before would have formed something more than coincidence. It would have been corroborative of this idea of motive. But under the real circumstances of the case, we are to suppose the gold in the motive of this outrage. We must also imagine the perpetrator so vacillating an idiot as to have abandoned his gold and his motive together. Keeping now steadily in mind these points to which I have drawn your attention, that peculiar voice, that unusual agility, and that startling absence of motive in a murder so singularly atrocious as this, let us glance at the butchery itself. Here is a woman strangled to death by manual strength, and thrust up a chimney, head downward. Ordinary assassins employ no such modes of murder as this. Least of all do they thus dispose of the murdered, in a matter of thrusting a corpse up a chimney. You will admit that there is something excessively absurd, something altogether irreconcilable with our common notions of human action, even when we suppose the actors of the most depraved men. Think, too, how great must have been the strength that which could thrust a body up such an aperture so forcefully that it united vigor of several persons was found barely sufficient to drag it down. Turn now to the other indications. Again, I appreciate that, Pooh, but it's not a competition. I do appreciate it, though. It does mean a lot that you're viewing and enjoying what I'm doing. So, again, this is not my usual thing to do during a stream, but I wanted to do spooky story nights, so, here I am. Turn now to the indication employment of the vigor most marvelous. On the hearth were thick tresses, very thick tresses of gray human hair. This had been torn out by the roots. You are aware of the great force necessary in tearing thus from a head even 20 or 30 hairs together. You saw the locks in question as well as myself. Their roots, a hideous sight, were clotted with fragments of the flesh of the scalp, sure token of the prodigious power which had been exerted in uprooting perhaps 500,000 hairs at a time. The throat of the old lady was not merely cut, but the head absolutely severed from the body. An instrument was a mere razor. I wish you could also look upon the brutal ferocity of these deeds. Of the bruises upon the body of Madame L'Espanaye, I do not speak. Monsieur Dumont and his worthy coadjutor, Monsieur Etienne, have pronounced that they were inflicted by some obtuse instrument, and so far these gentlemen are very correct. The obtuse instrument was clearly the stone pavement in the yard upon which the victim had fallen from the window which looked in upon the bed. This idea, however simple it may now seem, escaped the police for some reason, and thus the breadth of the shutters escaped them, because by the affair of the nails their perceptions have been hermetically sealed against the possibility of the windows have ever been opened at all. If now, in addition to all these things, you have properly reflected upon odd disorder of the chamber, we have gone so far as to combine the ideas of an agility astounding, its strength superhuman, a ferocity brutal, and a butchery without motive, the grotesquerie in murder and horror absolutely alien from humanity, and a voice foreign in tone to the ears of men of many nations, and devoid of all distinct or intelligible symbolification. What result then has ensued? What impression have I made upon your fancy? I felt a creeping in the flesh as Dupont asked me the question. A madman, I said, has done this deed, some raving maniac, escaping the neighborhood Mansion de Santé. In some respects, he replied, your idea is not irrelevant, but the voices of the madmen, even in their wildest paroxysms, are never found to tally in that particular, or peculiar, with that peculiar. Voice heard upon the stairs. Madmen are some nation, and their language, however incoherent in its words, has always the coherence of symbolification. Besides the hair of the madman, it is not such as I now hold in my hand, disentangled this little tuft from the rigidly clutched fingers of Madame L'Espanaye. Tell me, what can you make of it? Dupont, I said, completely unnerved, this hair is most unusual. This is no human hair. I have not asserted that it is. But before we decide this point, I wish you to glance a little sketch I have here traced upon this paper. It is a facsimile drawing of what has been described in one portion of the testimony as dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails upon the throat of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye. And another, de Monsenay, has a series of livid spots, evidently the impression of fingers. You will perceive, continued my friend, spreading out the paper upon the table before us, that this drawing gives the idea of a firm, fixed hold. There is no slipping apparent. Each finger has retained, possibly until death of the victim, the fearful grasp by which the originally embedded itself. Attempt now to place all your fingers at the same time in the respective impressions as you see them. I made the attempt in vain. We are possibly not giving this matter a fair trial, he said. The paper is spread out upon the plain surface, but the human throat is cylindrical. Here's a billet of wood, and the circumference of which is about that of a throat. Wrapping the drawing around it and try to experiment again. I did so, but the difficulty was even more obvious than before. This, I said, is the mark of no human hand. Read now, replied Dupont, the passage from Cuvier. It was a minute anatomical and generally descriptive account of the large fulvous orangutan of the East Indian Isles, the gigantic stature of the prodigious strength and activity, the wild ferocity, the imitative propensities of these mammalia are sufficiently well known to all. I understood the four horrors of the murder at once. The description of the digits, said I, as I made the end of the reading, is the exact accordance with this drawing. I see no animal but orangutan of that species here mentioned could have impressed the indentations as you had traced them. This tuft of tawny hair, too, is identical in character with that of the beast of Cuvier. But I cannot possibly comprehend the particulars of this frightful mystery. Besides, there are two voices heard in contention, and one of them was unquestionably the voice of a Frenchman. I think he's probably listening, but if he's not, it's fine. True, and you will remember an expression attributed almost unanimously by the evidence that to this voice the expression mon Dieu. This, under the circumstances, had been justly characterized by one of the witnesses, Montaigne, the confectioner, as an expression of remonstrance or expostulation. Upon these two words, therefore, I have mainly built my hopes in the full solution of the riddle. A Frenchman was cognizant of the murderer. It is possible, indeed, it is far more than probable that he was innocent of all participation in the bloody transactions which took place. The orangutan may have escaped from him. He may have traced it to the chamber. But under the agitating circumstances which ensued, he could never have recaptured it. It is still at large. I will not pursue these guesses, for I have no right to call them more, since the shades of reflection upon which they are based are scarcely of sufficient depth to be appreciable by my own intellect. And since I could not pretend to make them intelligible to the understanding of another, we will call them guesses then, and speak of them as such. If the Frenchman in question is indeed, as I suppose, innocent of his atrocity, this advertisement which I left last night upon our return home at the offices Le Mode, a paper devoted to the shipping interest and much sought by sailors, will bring him to our residence. He handed me a paper and read thus: Caught en Bois de Boulogne. Early this morning of the murder, the incident, a very large tawny orangutan of Barney's species, the owner who ascertained to be a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, may have the animal again upon identifying it satisfactorily and paying a few charges arising from its capture and keeping. Call at number Rue blank blank, Faubourg Saint-Germain, à Tresemme. How was it possible, I asked, that you should know the man to be a sailor and belonging to the Maltese vessel? I do not know, said Dupont. I am not sure of it. Here, however, is a small piece of ribbon. From its form, and from its greasy appearance, it has evidently been used in tying the hair of one of those long queues of which the sailor is so fond. Moreover, this knot of which belongs to the sailor can tie is a peculiar to the Maltese. I picked the ribbon up in the foot of the lightning rod. It could have been belonged to either of the deceased. Now, if after all I am wrong in my induction from the ribbon that the Frenchman was a sailor belonging to the Maltese vessel, still I can have done no harm in saying what I did in the advertisement. If I am in error, he will merely suppose that I have misled by some circumstance to which he will not take the trouble to inquire. But if I am right, a great point is gained. Cognizant, although innocent of the murder, the Frenchman will naturally hesitate about replying to the advertisement, about demanding the orangutan. He will reason this: I am innocent, I am poor, my orangutan is of great value. To one of my circumstance, a fortune of itself. Why should I lose it through the idle apprehensions of danger? Here it is within my grasp. Thank you for the large soul, Christina. It was found in the Bois de Boulogne, in the vast distance from the scene of that butchery. How could it ever be suspected that the brute beast should have done the deed? The police are at fault. They failed to procure the slightest clue. Should they even trace the animal, it would be impossible to prove me cognizant of the murder, or to implicate me in guilt on the account of its cognizance. Above all, I am known. The advertiser designates me as the possessor of the beast. I am not sure what the limit of his knowledge may extend. Should I avoid claiming a property? Thank you, Christina. Of so great a value, which is known that I possess, I will render the animal at least liable to suspicion. It is not my policy to attract attention either to myself or to the beast. I will answer the advertisement, get the orangutan, and keep it closed until the matter is blown over. At this moment we heard the step on the stairs. Be ready, said Dupont, with your pistols, but neither use them nor show them until the signal from myself. The front door of the house had been left open. The visitor had entered, without ringing, and advanced several steps upon the staircase. Now, however, he seemed to hesitate. Presently we heard him descending. Dupont was moving quickly to the door, where we again heard him coming up. He did not turn back a second. A second time, but stepped up with a decision and rapped the door of our chamber. Come in, said Dupont with a cheerful, hearty tone. A man entered. He was a sailor, evidently, a tall, stout, muscular-looking person, with a certain daredevil expression of countenance. Not altogether unprepossessing, his face greatly sunburnt, it was more than half hidden by whisker and mustachio. He had with him a huge oaken cudgel, but appeared to be otherwise unarmed. He bowed awkwardly and bade us good evening, in French accents which, although somewhat nefashlet, nefchatlish, were still sufficiently indicative of a Parisian origin. Sit down, my friend, said Dupont. You can't stop looking at my shirt? I'm sorry. There's nothing I can really do about it. When my actual avatar gets made, this is like just something I'm borrowing. It's a public. You won't have to worry about it. Sit down, my friend, said Dupont. I suppose you have called about the orangutan. Upon my word, I almost envy you for possession of him. A remarkable fine, and no doubt very valuable animal. How old do you suppose him to be? The animal drew a long breath with the air of a man relieved at some intolerable burden, and then replied in an assured tone, I have no way of telling, but he can't be more than 4 or 5 years old. Have you got him here? Oh no, we had no conveniences of keeping him here. He is in the livery stable on Rue de Bois, just by. You can get him in the morning. Of course, you are prepared to identify the property? To be sure I am, sir. I shall be sorry to part with him, said Dupont. I don't mean that you should be at all this trouble for nothing, sir, said the man. I couldn't expect it. I'm very willing to pay a reward for finding of the orangutan animal. Animal, yep. That has to say anything within reason. Well, replied my friend, that is all very fair, to be sure. Let me think. What should I have? Oh, I will tell you. My reward shall be this. You shall give me all the information in your power about these murders in the Rue Morgue. Dupont said the last words in a very slow tone and very quietly. Just as quietly, too, he walked towards the door, locked it, and put the key in his pocket. He then drew a pistol from his bosom and placed it without the least flurry upon the table. The soldier's face flushed up as he were struggling with suffocation. He started to his feet and grasped his cudgel, but the next moment he fell back to his seat, trembling violently, and then countenance of the death itself. He spoke not a word. I pitied him from the bottom of my heart. My friend, said Dupont in a kind tone, you are alarming yourself unnecessarily. You are, indeed. We mean you no harm whatsoever. I pledge to you the honor of a gentleman and of a Frenchman that we intend you no injury. I perfectly well know that you are innocent of all atrocities in the Rue Morgue. It will not do, however, to deny that you are in some measure implicated in them. From what I am already said, you must know that I have means of information about this matter, means of which you could never have dreamed. Now the thing stands thus. You have done nothing which you could have avoided, nothing certainly which renders you culpable. You are not even guilty of robbery, when you might have robbed with impunity. You have nothing to conceal. You have no reason for concealment. On the other hand, you are bound by every principle of honor to confess all you know. An innocent man is now in prison, charged with that crime of which you can point out the perpetrator. The sailor had recovered his presence of mind, and in great measure while Dupont uttered these words, but his original boldness of bearing was all gone. So help me God, he said after some brief pause. I will tell you all that I know about this affair, but I do not expect you to believe one half what I say. I would be a fool indeed if I did if I did. Still, I am innocent and will make clean breast of if I die for it. There we go. What he stated in substance this. He had lately made a voyage to the Indian archipelago, a party of which formed one landed at Borneo and had passed through the interior of the incursion of pleasure. Himself had a companion had captured the orangutan. This companion dying, the animal fell into his own exclusive possession. After great trouble occasioned by the intractable ferocity of this captive during the home voyage, he at length succeeded in lodging it safely at his own residence in Paris, where not to attract toward himself the unpleasant curiosity of his neighbors, he kept it carefully secluded, until such time as it should recover from the wound in its foot, received for splinter from on board ship. His ultimate design was to sell it. Returning home from some sailor's frolic in the night, or rather in the morning of the murder, he found the beast occupying his own bedroom, into which it had broken from the closet adjoining, where it had been, as was thought, securely confined, razor in hand, fully lathered, and was sitting before the glass attempting the operation of shaving, in which it had no doubt previously watched its master through the keyhole of the closet, terrified at the sight so dangerous a weapon in the possession of an animal so ferocious, and so well able to use it. The man, for some moments, was at a loss for what to do. He had been accustomed, however, to quiet the creature, even in the fiercest moods, by the use of a whip. And to this he now resorted. Upon sight of it, the orangutan sprang up once through the door of the chamber, down the stairs, and thence through the window, unfortunately opened into the street. The Frenchman followed in despair, the ape, razor still in hand, occasionally stopping to look back and gesticulate at his pursuer until the latter had nearly come up with it, and then again made off. In this manner the chase continued for a long time. The streets were profoundly quiet, as it was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. In passing down an alley in the rear of the Rue Morgue, the fugitive's attention was arrested by a light gleaming from an open window of Madame l'Espanaye's chamber. In the fourth story of her house, rushing to the building, It perceived the lightning rod, clambered up with unconceivable agility, grasped the shutter, which was thrown fully back against the wall, and by its means swung itself directly upon the headboard of the bed. The whole feat did not occupy a minute. The shutter was kicked open by the orangutan as it entered the room. The sailor, in the meantime, was both rejoiced and perplexed. He had strong hopes of now recapturing the brute, as it could scarcely escape from the trap in which it had ventured, except by the rod, where it might be interrupted as it came down. On the other hand, there was much cause for anxiety as for what it might do in the house. This latter reflected urged the man to still follow the fugitive. A lightning rod is ascended without difficulty, especially by a sailor. But when he arrived at as high as the window, which lay far to his left, his career was stopped. The most that he could accomplish was to reach over as to obtain a glimpse of the interior of the room. At this glimpse, he nearly fell from his hold through the excess of horror. Now it was those hideous shrieks arose upon the night, which had startled from slumber in the inmates of the Rue Morgue. Madame L'Espinaye and her daughter, habited in their night clothes, had apparently been occupied in arranging some papers in the iron chest already mentioned, which had been wheeled into the middle of the room. It was open, and its contents lay beside it on the floor. The victims must have been sitting with their backs towards the window, and from the time elapsing between the ingress of the beast and the screams, it seems probable that it was not immediately perceived. The flapping of the shutter would naturally have been attributed to the wind. As the sailor looked in, the gigantic animal had seized Madame L'Espinaye by the hair, which was loose, as she had been combing it, and was flourishing the razor about her face in imitation of the motions of the barber. The daughter lay prostrate and motionless. She had swooned. The screams and struggles of the old lady, during which the hair was torn from her head, had an effect of changing the probably pacific purposes of the orangutan into those of wrath. With one determined sweep of its muscular arm, it nearly severed her head from her body. The sight of blood inflamed its anger into frenzy. Gnashing its teeth and flashing fire from its eyes, it flew upon the body of the girl, embedded its fearful talons in her throat, retaining its grasp until she expired. Its wandering and wild glances fell at this moment upon the head of the bed, which the face of its master, rigid with horror, was just discernible. The fury of the beast, who no doubt bore still in mind the dreaded whip, was instantly converted to fear. Yeah, no worries, Boo. We're getting there. Conscious of having deserved punishment, it seemed desirous of concealing its bloody deeds, and skipped about the chamber in the agony of nervous agitation, throwing down and breaking the furniture as it moved, dragging the bed from the bedstead. In conclusion, it seized the first corpse of the daughter. Ooh, my goodness. And thrust it up the chimney, as was found then that of the old lady, which immediately hurled through the window headlong. As the ape approached the casement with its mutilated burden, the sailor shrank aghast to the rod, and rather gliding than clambering down it, hurried once home, dreaded the consequences of the butchery, and gladly abandoning in his terror all solicitude about the event of the orangutan. The words heard by the party upon the staircase were the Frenchman's exclamations of horror and affright commingled with the fiendish jabberings of the brute. I have scarcely anything to add. The orangutan must have escaped from the chamber by the rod just before the break of the door. It must have closed the window as it passed through, and was subsequently caught by the owner himself, who obtained it for a very large sum as Jardin de Plomb. Le Bon was instantly released upon our narration of the circumstances, with some comments from Dupont and the Bureau of the Prefect of Police. Its functionary, however well disposed to my friend, could not altogether conceal his chagrin at the turn of affairs which had taken, and feigned to indulge the sarcasm or two about propriety of every person minding his own business. Let him talk, said Dupont, who had not thought necessary to reply. Let him discourse. It will ease his conscience. I'm satisfied with having defeated him in his own castle. Nevertheless, that he failed in the solution of this mystery is by no means that matter for wonder which he supposed it for. For in truth, our friend, the prefect, is somewhat too cunning to be profound. In his wisdom, there is no stamen. It is all head and no body. Like the pictures of the goddess Laverna, or at best, all head and shoulders, like a codfish. He is a good creature after all. I like him especially for one master stroke of cant, by which he has attained his reputation for ingenuity. I mean by way he has denouncé yes, words. French. Okay. So that was the murder mystery of the Rue Morgue. Okay. I think we've been going for long enough. We read 3 stories and it took 3 hours, the last one taking the longest. Ugh. So I think it's just a couple of us here, and that's fine. Trying to see if there's anybody on, but not really. So thank you all for being here for story night. I appreciate that you stopped by and listened to my ramblings for 3 hours. We still have more stories to go, but who knows? We may do something else tomorrow instead. But I do want to thank you. It does mean a lot. And again, a lot of people went to sleep. And that's fine. But thank you, Boo. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Jeff, Logan, everybody who was here earlier. Again, I'd like to do this more often, but yeah, let me know what you think. And we'll do this some other time. All right. You all have a good night, everybody. I'm not going to do a raid today only because there doesn't seem to be anybody on that really needs the help. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I know. I know, Boo. I know. If you haven't already, feel free to join the Discord, !Discord. Follow the Twitter, !Twitter, or the YouTube, !YouTube. And I will see everybody next time. Bye-bye.